Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Kiana. This is going to be a little bit more retrospective, so I'm actually going to be talking about some of the research I did during my undergraduate time that eventually led me to be here. So when I was a junior at the University of San Diego, I went to the School for Field Studies base in Karatu, Tanzania to study wildlife management for 6 months. And then later I kind of took that work and expanded it to be my senior thesis for my undergraduate. And I want to thank Dr. Brito Mian at the University of San Diego, who really helped mentor me on this project. So it was 2017. I was 20 years old, and I was doing this huge research project in 3 different districts in northern Tanzania on the main tourist circuit that connected the Serengeti, Ngorongoro Crater, and Mount Kilimanjaro. So this was actually part of an existing research project. So throughout this, n equals 347, if that means anything to you. We did 347 interviews. So these 3 districts were picked because of their location to different types of protected areas under the Tanzanian federal government. So there were a bunch of different kinds, including national parks, wildlife conservancies, but notably the Babati district in green was part of a wildlife management area, or a WMA. And those are basically a relatively new type of protected area in which the local communities actually are key decision makers in the wildlife management of that area, and a large amount of the profit derived from tourism or game hunting in that area is funneled back into the community, as opposed to other systems like national parks, where very little of that money goes back into the community. Oh yeah, there we go. So for us to conceptualize kind of human-wildlife conflict in Tanzania, it's important to note that 80% of Tanzania's population lives in rural communities and typically connect with megafauna populations on a nearly daily basis. It's also important to note that our surveys, our interviews, were meant to gauge the perceptions of the costs and benefits associated with these populations, as well as perceptions about current wildlife management strategies and recommendations for future wildlife management strategies, as well as who should implement those. So we categorized the benefits and costs of the 2 populations into some of the benefits were the ecosystem services that the wildlife provided as integral parts of the ecosystem, the tourism industry, which again was comprised of mostly game hunting and tourism and forms of safari or photography, and also bushmeat, which accounts for about 20% of the protein of the population. And then the costs were economic loss from livestock predation, property loss, or the destruction of produce. And food insecurity could sometimes result from this if destruction caused a family or a community to lose their means of production. This could also, in extreme cases, result in injury, death, or disease, both on the part of humans, who could be accidental victims of human-wildlife conflict, or animals that were maybe the victims of retaliation killings. So in the interest of time, I'll just present the most interesting part of our findings, which was basically the Babati district, which again was part of that wildlife management area, were the least likely to recommend that animals be killed as a means of wildlife conservation, which we used as a proxy for tolerance of animals. They were also the most likely to recommend that some type of wildlife management be taken, again, kind of suggesting a type of efficacy in conservation means. And they were also the most likely to work cooperatively with federal agencies or local authorities to do so. So that was kind of that. We wrote an article, it was great. But then I took my first environmental justice course this semester after I got back from this. And I started to kind of dissect my own work through this new environmental justice lens as I was unlearning some of the science that I had grown up being taught. And really, if you look at this, it's just a huge story of distrust. A lot of people in these communities are not willing to work with government agencies, and really notably NGOs, and don't want them to be a part of this. And so that category of no one is really just a kind way of saying, hands off our area, leave us alone, we can do this by ourselves. And you can see, again, that themselves is the next highest category overall. So I thought kind of critically about my own research, and eventually that led me to come here to SEAS, but thinking about the ways in which we were potentially perpetuating harmful narratives in our own research, and the ways in which we can do better in the future. So really, this was a huge consequence of climate change that African nations have not grossly participated in, and instead are now suffering the harmful consequences of as land becomes more arid and less arable for farmers. Human-wildlife conflict is becoming increasingly common as both farmers and animals need to cover larger ranges of area in order to both produce the same amount of food that they need to or find the prey that they need to. So really, this was kind of being able to recognize these people as capable decision makers with autonomy and users of local knowledge is really critical to this increasing problem in the area. And so moving forward, I think that looking at the redistribution of benefits and recognition of locals through this decolonial framework that's looking at the legacies of how colonialism and climate change are really affecting this problem is really the true solution to this, not just moving towards climate or community-based conservation.